suggest even for young people, because I think that's really important, that nonverbal, which again is usually again not really talked about at all in school. Do you find, or would you maybe suggest that maybe like after meetings, just having like a quick reflection with yourself of just like seeing how people reacted and being like, okay, this person kind of was a little withdrawn here. Like, why was that? Like, kind of just starting to play back the meeting to yourself and like trying to figure out how people were reacting to different things.
Yeah, I think it's always good to process what happened. And you can process in the moment too, right? So, and that requires you to be quiet and watch, which everybody's not that good at. I'm not that good at. I mean, in the sense that I like to talk, I have to remind myself to be quiet, because that's the only way. That's where I get the most information. I don't get any information when I'm talking, right? I get information when other people are, and so I think that, yeah, repaying that and getting confirmation, right? So I'll often be in a meeting and see someone, and I'll conclude somewhere in the meeting or at the end of the meeting that they either conclude something. They weren't attuned to what I was saying, or they felt lost in the conversation, or they were very kind of, in their thoughts, whatever it is. And I will circle back with the person and say, hey, when we were in that meeting, either when we were talking about X, I sensed Y or da 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 da. And that gives you confirmation about whether or not you think you saw is what you saw. Now, people aren't always honest and people don't always know, right? So I think we believe too much that people understand their personal state. Sometimes people, they don't realize that they're not comfortable. And when you say to them, you seemed uncomfortable, they'll stop sometimes. You've seen this, has happened to you, and they'll reflect, and they'll either come back and say, no, 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 I was really comfortable. Or they'll say, yeah, you're right, I wasn't. Right. And then you can have the next conversation. But it helps to one-on-one go back sometimes, especially if it's something or a relationship that's really important, to go back and kind of verify what you thought you felt and what you thought you heard was what it actually was.
I think as young people, there's a lot of anxiety of like, what can I do? What can't I do? Where can I be? And you're kind of, especially in your 20s, figuring that out. And I think what you showed there is much more like inclined for action, worry about the consequence after that. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that and the importance of that, and maybe especially as a female, because I think oftentimes you see that a lot in studies where they don't always be maybe as assertive in those situations.
So one of those valuable lessons I've learned throughout my career is, again, we judge others by their actions, we judge ourselves by our intention. So how do I stop and give people more grace? It's like I always tell people, young couples that are getting married, something somebody told me was, the marriage is just the beginning, right? The wedding, sorry, is just the beginning. The marriage is the journey, right? And so when you get a seat at the table, whatever that metaphorical table is for you, it is then using your voice, right? So don't just get in the room, get at the table and use your voice once you're there. And so it's a valuable lesson for me. And I'm like everybody else. Believe me, if I'm excluded for something or I'm walking into a room and I don't quite know, I go through them. Am I supposed to be here? And am I supposed to be talking? And, all that kind of stuff. And I oftentimes ask for forgiveness as opposed to permission.
I think another thing that you talked about as you were going through your career that I thought was also really important is that you didn't let others define you. And I was wondering if you can talk a bit about that and the importance of, and again, especially even like, again, a young professional, people are going to see you as younger, not having the experience. That's going to be a definition that comes at you right when you graduate, no matter who you are, right?
Yeah.
And then there's other things that, depending on your background, race, et cetera, that are also people are going to try and put you into a box. And I was wondering, how did you push back against that and define yourself?
It's interesting you say that. I tell people, they often ask, what's it like to be a woman of color, working in a primarily male dominated and white male dominated field or area. And what I would say to people is, I actually felt more of a rub about my age oftentimes than I did about the other two. So it's tough to be the youngest person in the room. And it is. And so part of what I always thought about, though, is about who I am and how I want it to be defined, and tried to stick to that, right? To ask myself at times, what is my personal brand, and how do I want to show up? And we just don't, as people, spend a lot of time around that. And I think that you should. And it's not that it has to be something that's static. And parts of your brand develop over time anyway, right? Because they are in part based by how other people perceive you. But I have always thought it was really important in my career that I define as much of that as I can. And when I found myself to be off of what I wanted my brand to be, I would I've asked myself, is that my new brand, or do I need to do things to modify that? Am I doing things that now I'm going, well, this isn't what I really want my brand to be. How do I change that so that people can see how I want to show up?
Yeah, and I think I just kind of close this out. I think Bettina, like your career has been fascinating to me because from you know English teacher to lawyer to now CEO, that's running the electrification revolution. And so I was guess when you look back on it, is there one or two things that you would suggest students to do while in college that they should maybe over index on?
So our old CEO used to talk about black swan moments, right? And black swan moments, of course, are things that could not be predicted. So a black swan is occasionally born, but there's nothing that tells you that that black swan is going to be born, which is just fascinating to me. And so what I tell people is you can't actually prepare for the black swan, right? There's nothing you can do that allows you to say, I know that black swan's going to be born. But what you have to be able to say is, I know that there are going to be things in my life that I did not predict. And so being able to process that and then say to yourself, and when those things happen, I'm going to figure out how to take advantage of them, is really, really important.